Midnight laid its cold hand over Dustwater Gulch. Wind combed the cemetery grass into ripples, and stormlight flared beyond the buttes like a blacksmith's forge hidden inside the sky. Sheriff Kane stood alone among wooden markers and tilted stone, oil lantern throwing a burnished circle around his boots. The flame guttered when the gusts came. The grave did not. Fresh dirt lay smooth as a stitched wound, shovel marks combed neat, the mound dark and wet from an evening storm that had quit, but hadn't forgiven. He could still feel the handle in his palms, splinters, the rhythm, lift, throw, lift, throw. The sound of it had followed him back up from the pit and sat with him now, like a guilty dog that wouldn't be sent away. The silver badge on his chest caught a sliver of lantern light and glowed like a false star. He pinched its rim between thumb and forefinger and let it spin. The metal clicked softly. Tiny clock, tiny gallows. Law ain't always justice, he murmured to the wind, but justice rides with me. The lantern hissed. Then the earth breathed. Kane saw it, not a trick of shadow, not the wind's sleight of hand. The dirt rose a finger's width and settled. The grave shivered, as if some animal turned below. He stepped forward, boots sinking. One more breath beneath the earth. One more, and then the mound cracked open like a dry lip in summer, and a splintered plank pushed up through the soil. Kane pulled his Colt .45, pearl grip damp under his palm, muzzle lowered to the stirring ground. He had buried Eli Mercer at sunset with his own hands. He had heard the last words, felt the last tremor of the coffin's rope, counted the last handfuls of dirt. Yet here the boards lifted. Here the earth gave back what the law had swallowed whole. Lightning stitched the horizon. In its blue light, the gallows on the hill showed like dead antlers against the clouds. The old town gallows, weather-gray, rope swaying with a ghost of wind. The abandoned courthouse beyond it, hunched in the dark, windows black as knocked-out teeth. Kane listened. The storm talked far away. Closer, a nail squealed in wood below, a sound like a man's breath catching in his chest. Mercer, Kane said, and the name drifted down with the loose dirt. If you got one more lie in you, speak it. The mound bulged hard, split. A hand shot up through the seam, groping, caked in earth, fingers clawing at the night. Kane did not shoot. He stepped back instead as the hand scraped air, desperate, seeking. Clods rolled. The coffin's lid cracked with a wet sigh, and another hand thrust free. The lantern's flame leaned away, long and afraid. He saw scars, fresh gouges where the nails had been torn, crescent moons of blood at the tips, a wedding band dulled with soil. Eli Mercer was married. That part of him the judge had not managed to hang. Kane tasted dust, skin salt, memory iron. It had started that afternoon with heat thrown down like a dare. Judge Tolliver wore a black frock coat that drank the brightness and left his face pale as tallow. He read from a folded paper in the courthouse yard, while folks clustered in the shade, like cattle, trapped by fence and thirst. By order of the territorial court, Tolliver intoned, voice clean and practiced, the outlaw Eli Mercer will be interred until he yields the location of the Holcomb payroll and confesses to the killings at Half Mile Draw. If he repents and confesses, he shall be raised. Elsewise you'll make the dirt do your hanging, Kane said, low enough for Tolliver alone. The judge's eyes were coins. Nothing spent them. Sheriff, Tolliver answered without turning, the law provides for confinement. A cell is timber. A box is timber. Dirt is merely God's lock. He smiled, a gentle thing with knives in it. "Bring the prisoner." Mercer came between two deputies, wrists in shackles, jaw set. He had the lean, sun-starved look of a cowhand who'd traded fence wire for road dust too long, the brand of hard miles. He was 30, perhaps. His eyes were older. "You ever sat a man up to the edge of hell and asked if he'd like to step in?" Mercer asked Kane as they paused by the coffin. His voice was raw, not from crying. Kane had seen that raw before, but from shouting himself heard in a room where the judge had no ears. "I'm asking where you stashed the Holcomb gold," Kane said. The weight of 100 townsfolk stared on his shoulders. The badge bored a cold circle into his ribs. "And whether you put a bullet in 2 men who didn't have one coming." "I didn't kill at half-mile draw," Mercer said. "And I didn't take your banker's breath money, but I know who did." And he shakes your hand on Market Street. He lifted his chin toward Tolliver without looking. He smiles when little boys run past because he already knows where their fathers will die. "Names," Kane said. His temper ran a hot current beneath a frozen river. Mercer's lips twisted. "You bury me for a judge who sells rope by the foot, and you want names. Sheriff, what you bury tonight ain't me. It's what you've got left of yourself." Kane had laid the rope around the coffin, hammered the lid when the judge nodded. The sound was meat and thunder, each nail a verse in some hymn no church would print. When the first shovelful hit, Kane's hands didn't tremble. When the dirt muffled Mercer's voice into nothing, his heart did. "Enough," Tolliver had said. "The law is satisfied." The townsfolk broke like a wave around driftwood and went home. The sun limped down, red as a wound. Kane lingered. The mound sat there. He put his palm against it once, as if feeling for a slowed heartbeat through the skin of the world. He did not pray. He did not drink. He stood until the horizon went to iron, and the first wind of midnight licked the cemetery with its dry tongue. Now that hand-clawed sky. Fingers scrabbled for purchase and found none. The earth gave like wet bread. Kane holstered the Colt and dropped to his knees. He didn't think. He didn't look to see who might be watching. He set the lantern aside and tore at the soft dark with both hands. He heard his breath, harsh, and the quick snatched sounds of the living under soil. He got one wrist, slick and cold, and pulled. The arm drove into the night up to the elbow and hung there, shaking. "Hold on," Kane said, throat a rasp. "You hold." He grabbed the cracked plank and wrenched. It splintered with the sound of a rib breaking in a quiet room. He tore another board free, and another. Dirt collapsed like a tide into the coffin. Kane took it on the chin, spitting, eyes burning. He got his hands beneath Mercer's armpits. Then the voice came, thin, more air than word. "Kane." The sheriff froze. The graveyard tilted, lantern light yawning sideways, as if the earth had decided to lean on its elbow and watch. "Kane," the voice said again, a whisper sanded down by dirt and the dark. "Behind you." The badge was still an ember on his chest. He felt its heat turn to ice. Kane pivoted, one hand still gripping the man in the box. The gallows creaked, though the air was for once still. He looked up toward that rotting frame on the hill. Rope hung perfectly vertical, not moving now, but something else had. Lantern light reached the nearest marker. A boot print dented the wet soil beside it. Fresh, heel to toe, pressed by weight that hadn't been there a moment ago. Another print stood 6 feet to the left, pointed toward the iron fence. Beyond the fence, the brush moved, quiet as a habit. Kane's skin crawled the way it had in war when he'd smelled an ambush a heartbeat before it blossomed. Mercer shifted in the coffin below him, a broken breathing thing pulled half into the night. The prince led away from the grave Kane had just opened. More than one set. Smaller, lighter. One dragged at the toe like a limp. Tolliver's smile drifted up from memory. God's lock. Kane bent to haul Mercer the rest of the way when the lantern flame tightened to the thin blue of a blade, and a voice out in the dark, calm, cultured, carried clean as a bell across the bones of the dead. "Sheriff," it called, "step away from that grave." Kane did not step. He pulled once more, and Mercer's shoulder cleared the rim. Earth sheeted off him. The Colt was in Kane's other hand, low, steady. Wind returned with sudden teeth, snapping the grass flat. The gallows rope creaked again, a long, slow sigh. "You buried a man alive," the voice said, nearer now. "Let him finish dying, or you'll join him." Kane looked down at Mercer. Gray lips, black dirt in his beard, eyes like coals, buried but stubborn. The judge's order was folded clean in his pocket, like a prayer someone else wrote. The badge in Kane's fingers spun of its own accord. He lifted his head, gun leveled, grit in his teeth. "You best step where I can see you," he said, voice flat as the plate inside a coffin lid, "or I'm coming to find you." Something moved just beyond the fence, a coat hem in lantern shimmer, the pale slice of a face under a hat brim. Then another shape ghosted the opposite side, close to the dead oak. 3 men, maybe 4. The prints were theirs. They'd been waiting for the grave to give back its debtor. Mercer's hand clamped Kane's sleeve with a strength that didn't belong to a dying man. "Judge Tolliver," he rasped, and the name cut the night like a shovel edge. Kane set his boots. Thunder came low from the buttes, like a warning cough before the shot. "Last chance, Sheriff," the voice said. "Let the dirt keep what you owed it." The lantern guttered to a blue pin, then flared. The nearest shadow stepped into sight, and Kane saw what glinted in the stranger's hand. Iron shackles, jaws open, ready. The earth under Kane's knees gave another long sigh as Mercer dragged in a breath. Kane had one heartbeat to choose which law to keep. Then the grave shifted again, and something behind him moved. By late afternoon, the light had turned the street of Dustwater Gulch the color of old brass. Heat rose off the hard pan in shimmers. Flies worried the hitch rails. The wind had gone tight and mean like a fiddle string about to snap. Sheriff Kane stood in the jailhouse doorway, with his thumbs resting on his gun belt and his jaw set hard enough to crack a tooth. Inside the single cell, a man sat cuffed to the bench, wrists ringed with iron and dried blood. Eli Mercer looked up when Kane's shadow crossed the floor. "You got a decent coffee in this town?" Mercer asked, mouth split at the corner, eyes sharp. "Or only sermons?" Kane didn't answer. He studied what mattered, the steadiness in Mercer's breath, the way he carried pain without showing it, the wedding band dulled with grime on the man's finger. Can't fake a thing like that. "You're accused of the half-mile draw killings," the sheriff said at last, "and the Holcomb payroll. A man can be accused of rain if a judge wants it dry." Mercer replied, "You know this, Sheriff." Kane's steel-gray gaze didn't blink. "Names." Mercer's smile was quick and bitter. "You want names? Don't bury me. Let me speak in a room with windows that open." A hinge groaned out front. Boots scraped the boardwalk. Judge Tolliver filled the door like a storm cloud in a black frock coat, hat brim knife straight, white glove fingertips already dusty from touching too many things that weren't his. 2 bailiffs, Burke and Quaid loomed behind him, jawed like anvils. "Sheriff," Tolliver said, voice smooth as polished bone. "Time." Kane kept his face blank. "We holding a trial, Judge, or a spectacle?" Tolliver unfolded a paper with care. "Confinement until confession, provided under the Emergency Code, Section 12. Territorial writ." He tapped the page. "The cells are full, and the town demands peace. The ground is God's lock. We will employ it." "That ain't law," said old Mrs. Derry from the boardwalk, her hands white-knuckled around a rosary. "That's a sin with paperwork on it." "The law is what keeps sin from breeding," Tolliver said without turning. "Bring the prisoner." Kane unlocked the cell. The key clicked against iron like a nail being counted. Mercer rose slow, favoring one side. When Kane fastened the shackles and stepped him into daylight, the townsfolk drew tight in a rough circle. Ranchers with hat brims crushed flat. Women with mouths set like they'd been told to hush all their lives. The gallows stood above town, on the scrubby hill, like a skeleton waiting on skin. Beyond it lay the cemetery, small stones and weathered crosses, and a rank of fresh-cut pine planks stacked beside an open wagon. As they walked, dust stuck to the sweat in Kane's collar. A fly landed on the sheriff's silver badge and wandered there like it owned the sky. He flicked it off with his thumb and let the badge spin once, the metal flashing, his mind skidding over the edge of a memory he never let have reins. Wife, son, rope. A door he'd opened too late. At the cemetery gate, the preacher wouldn't meet their eyes. Tolliver didn't bother with him. He nodded to Burke and Quaid, and the bailiffs lifted the coffin lid to show clean, bare boards within. No padding, no mercy. A round knob hole had been drilled near the head plank and plugged with a dowel the size of a finger. Kane noticed it and filed the noticing away. "This is unlawful," the sheriff said low. The wind leaned through rabbit brush and came away with the smell of wet iron. Far off, thunder smudged the horizon. "Sheriff," Tolliver murmured, close enough that Kane felt the man's breath. "You were elected to keep order. Men die in disorder. Mercy breeds chaos. The town is watching." Kane's hand closed around the badge in his coat. He could feel the cool circle grind into his palm. "Law ain't always justice," he said, voice so quiet the words barely found air. "But justice rides with me." "Then ride with me," Tolliver answered, and smiled the smallest smile. They put Mercer in the box. His boots knocked the end board. He lay there breathing like a man measuring a last mile, steadily, because panic wastes what's left. Kane wanted his hands to shake when he took the hammer. They didn't. The first nail drew a gasp from somebody's throat. The second found the stud true. By the third nail, the yard had gone so quiet, Kane could hear the lanterns chattering on their hooks along the fence, glass tapping metal as wind worried them. "Sheriff," Mercer said through the lid, his voice flat as the boards. "You ever bury what's left of yourself? You're about to." Kane's jaw worked once. He set the fourth nail, drove it clean, and when he set the fifth, his arm stalled. Tolliver's white glove closed over the hammer head. "Finish it." Kane finished it. They lowered the coffin on block and tackle, rope whispering across wood. Dirt hit the lid in spits, and then shovels full, drumming like hard rain on a summer porch. The mound rose. Mercer's voice came once more, thin and impossible to place. "Sheriff," and then the dirt swallowed it, tamped and slicked by Quaid's boot. A little boy standing near the fence began to cry. His mother hushed him and didn't notice the way Kane's fingers had gone bloodless around the shovel handle. When the last spadeful fell, Tolliver lifted his hat an inch as though he'd done something sacred, then planted a thin willow switch upright in the fresh earth and brushed dust from his sleeve. "What's that stick for?" Old Mrs. Derry's voice shook. "A grave mark," Tolliver said. His eyes did not blink. Kane stepped closer. The willow was green, sap wet at the cut. It sat over the place a man's mouth might be, if a man had anything left to say. The dowel hole in the head plank ticked in the back of Kane's skull like a pocket watch. He caught Quaid, grinning past a toothpick. "You seen this done before?" the sheriff asked. "Plenty," Quaid said. "Most men talk faster when they hear their own dirt." "Enough," Tolliver snapped. He handed Burke a folded note. The bailiff tucked it into his vest and slipped a look at the sky. Townsfolk bled away in twos and threes, wagons creaking, whispers dragging behind them like loose straps. Only the judge and his men lingered. The preacher had already gone. Kane stood at the edge of the mound and felt the weight of his badge like a millstone. "You going to post a watch?" he asked. "The earth is the watch," Tolliver said, pleasant again. "Men who mean to confess do so in the night. Men who mean to die do it stubborn. Either way, the morning is clean." Kane's eyes slid to the willow switch. He could almost hear air catching there, the small hiss a man might make if there were space enough to be brave. The image made bile touch the back of his throat. "How long?" Kane asked. "Until repentance," Tolliver said, and adjusted his cuff. "Or sunrise." The judge turned for town. Burke and Quaid followed, boots chewing gravel. Kane stayed. Clouds stacked ugly over the buttes. Lightning stitched the distance. The wind came up with the sour tang that rides before a storm. He took his hat off and let the sweat dry on his scalp. He told himself he'd done his duty. He told himself a lot of things that felt like splinters going in. Hoofbeats scuffed somewhere beyond the fence. Kane put the hat back on and walked slow along the iron bars. The pines at the cemetery's far edge nickered like horses in a bad dream. He found what he didn't want to find by the gate post, a shovel leaning against it, clean, new, its handle wrapped with a strip of oily rag. A scrap of paper was tucked under the cord. He slid it free with 2 fingers. "Midnight," it said, in a tidy hand. "Bring no one." Kane looked at the mound. Wind curled the top layer of dirt, like breath-lifting hair. He put the note in his vest. The silver badge in his other hand began to spin of its own accord, coin bright and faithless. He walked the fence once more. Fresh boot marks pocked the mud just outside, small, light, one dragging the toe. The same prints he would see later, the same limp. But now the sky growled, and the smell of rain pressed down, and the grave lay quiet as a shut book. He lifted the willow switch between forefinger and thumb. It came up 1/2 inch, and he saw what he was afraid to see. A hollow under the plug, a mean little airway cut into the packed dirt, like the throat of a flute. Tolliver's voice from earlier. "The ground is God's lock, and someone else's key." Kane let the willow fall back and felt that key turn. He saw it on his heels, laid his palm flat to the cool earth, where a man's face might be, and whispered something that tasted like rust. "Hold." He rose, dusted his knees, and took 3 steps toward town before he heard it. Faint, deliberate, impossible to mistake once you'd buried enough men to know the truth of what knocking means. 1, 2, 3, from under the ground. Kane turned, heart kicking the bars of his chest, Colt already partway free when the wind shoved the grass flat, and a voice drifted from the dark beyond the gate, cultured, patient, without hurry, as if the whole cemetery belonged to it. "Midnight, Sheriff. Come alone." Lightning ripped the sky wide open, and for an instant he saw them. 2 figures just past the fence, hats low, coats hanging still in the sudden white. Then darkness closed like a fist. Kane stood between the badge and the grave, rain starting to sting his face, the note sweating ink against his heart. He had hours to decide which law he'd keep, and when the clock dragged its way to midnight, the ground would answer whether a man could claw back out of hell or drag another down to join him. By morning, the wind had lost its teeth, leaving Dustwater Gulch in a hard, breath-holding quiet. Heat stacked over the rooftops and held there, mean as a debt collector. Sheriff Kane walked the spine of Main Street from the jailhouse to the pump and back, a slow, deliberate patrol meant to look like routine. It didn't. Doors stayed half shut as he passed, faces tilted in windows, then vanished. A broom stopped mid-sweep on the mercantile porch, while Mrs. Finch stood with bristles hanging, her mouth a flat line. The silver badge rode his chest, like a brand fresh struck. It turned when he breathed and flashed once, coin bright and accusing. He tasted dust and last night's lightning in the air, a metal tang that didn't belong to morning. The gallows on the ridge watched town the way a hawk watches chickens, patient, already fed. The abandoned courthouse crouched behind it, all black windows and flaked paint, reminding him of a mouth that had chewed too much law and forgot how to swallow justice. At the pump, a ranch hand filled a bucket and kept his eyes low. "Mornin', Sheriff," the man said, then winced as if the words might get him whipped. 2 children went skittering by with a hoop. Their mother caught them by the collars and yanked them into a doorway so hard the hoop kept rolling alone, spoking itself into a lamppost. Someone spat in the dirt. Kane heard it more than he saw it, the wet punctuation of a thought men didn't care to say out loud. Inside the Red Ace saloon, the piano had the lid down like a coffin. Men drank earlier than usual and quieter, hands wrapped around shot glasses the way starving folks wrap bread. When Kane stepped in, heat and whiskey breath slid over him. Poker chips clicked and then were still. A dealer with tobacco teeth smiled with the wrong part of his face. "Mornin', Sheriff," he said. "Heard the ground took a man into custody for you." "That what you heard?" Kane asked. "That what the judge said?" The dealer toyed with a queen of spades and didn't look up. Said the court put a thief in a wooden cell, same as any other. Said if folks don't like the method, they ought to ask the Lord why he made dirt plentiful. Laughter tried to rise and died, strangled. A rancher in a sun-blasted hat tapped his glass. "Ain't right," he muttered. "Ain't decent." His eyes cut to Kane, with fear pressed into the whites. "But I reckon decent's expensive, and we're short this season." "Decent ain't for sale," Kane said, and the room shifted like everybody had suddenly found their boots ill-fitting. He didn't drink. He watched their hands. Men tell the truth there before their mouths catch up. He saw fists making without meaning to, knuckles whitening under hard skin. He saw shame, too, how it turns a man mean because it can't find any other door out. When he stepped back into the street, the sun pinned him with a nail of white heat, and he squinted toward the courthouse steps because a voice was droning there, pleasant and practiced, the way a snake scale looks clean before it bites. Judge Tolliver had taken the top stair, as if that log-tongued building were a pulpit on Sunday. He'd shed his coat and stood in shirt sleeves, white as salt, the ends crisp and immaculate, despite the heat. A cane leaned against the rail. The man's left foot favored itself by a whisper, a small drag at the toe, nothing you'd see if you weren't looking for it. Kane was looking. "Citizens," Tolliver called, hands open, that mild smile nailed in place. "These are trying days. Our safety is not a matter for debate. It is a matter for order. The court has acted within the emergency code, confined a known outlaw until confession. No decent person celebrates such measures, but decent people understand necessity." A murmur like angry bees. Mrs. Holcomb, a banker's widow in a black dress boiled to sheen by grief and sun, pushed to the front. Her cheeks had carved themselves thinner since spring, her mouth a seam that pain hadn't taught to soften. "Decency?" she said, voice brittle as sugar glass. "You put a breathing man in the ground and call it decent? My husband's in the cemetery proper, Judge Tolliver, and I still know the difference between burying and killing." She turned to Kane before the judge could reply. "And you threw dirt, Sheriff. I saw your hands." Kane met her eyes and didn't shy. "I did." "Then don't you dare wear that badge like it's silver," she said, and her palm lifted and cracked across his cheek, once, neat and ringing. The sound reached all the way down the street and came back off the far buildings. A child whimpered. A man swore under his teeth. Tolliver's smile did not move, but his gaze warmed 2 degrees at the edges. The way a stove gets a glow you only notice when you're close enough to blister. "Enough," Tolliver said, gentle as a pillow. "We are not a mob. We are a town. We will appoint a citizens' committee to oversee the sheriff's further actions. Transparency breeds trust." He set a hand on the shoulder of a man at his right. "Mason Pike will chair the committee." Pike, a freight foreman with shoulders like a crate and a scar slanting his lip, scanned the crowd. He had the look of a man who enjoyed a job when it gave him license. "First order," he said. "No one goes up to the cemetery unless the judge or I say so. Second, nobody feeds rumors. Fear is a prairie fire. We stamp it, we don't fan it." "What rumor?" came a voice from the back. "That you can hear knockin' if you stand quiet." Another voice, that a willow twig was stuck like a straw for breath. Laughter came, short and badly shaped. Someone else, nastier. That the sheriff's got dirt in his ears where a conscience ought to be. Kane let it roll until it didn't. "You talk about me all morning if it keeps you from lighting torches," he said, voice flat. He moved to the foot of the steps and felt heat coming up from the boards like a forge. "But hear this plain. I won't have a lynch mob on my street. Not for Eli Mercer, not for me, not for the devil himself. Anybody raises a rope without a court behind it." His eyes flicked to Tolliver. "A true court meets the law in my hand." "Your hand put him in the ground," Pike said, smiling with his scar. "My hand can keep you out of jail," Kane said, and the words laid down a line in the dust, so clear men could see it without squinting. For a heartbeat, he thought he'd have to draw. The crowd's weight shifted forward, then back, then forward again like a herd sniffing blood. The piano inside the Red Ace found one note by accident and left it quivering in the doorway. Flies made a sound like whispering. The preacher arrived late with his collar crooked, hair blown to one side, as if he'd wrestled with God and the wind both and lost. "Brothers," he said, breathless, raising a Bible that looked tired of being raised. "Sisters, he that is without sin among you hasn't buried a man alive," someone shouted. A bottle hit the jailhouse wall and burst. Whiskey bled down the plank like a wound, and ran in the dust in a dark thread. Kane set his hat down on the rail, unpinned the badge, and held it between finger and thumb where everyone could see the way the light took it. "Any of you want this job? Step up," he said, soft enough to make them lean to hear. "But understand what you're stepping into. The badge ain't a mirror. It don't make you look right. It's a weight. You carry it wrong. It breaks your back." He spun it once and pinned it back on. The gesture drew a sound from the crowd that wasn't quite a sigh and wasn't quite the start of a howl. Tolliver gauged that sound like a banker gauges a ledger. How much left, how much owed. "Sheriff," the judge said, can tip tapping once on wood, tick like a clock. A word. They stepped aside into the shade of the courthouse awning that had the stale taste of old tobacco and old speeches. From here, Kane could see the ridge with the gallows and the darker smear beyond where cemetery cedars cut the sky. Tolliver's left foot dragged its whispering toe again. His white glove touched the rail as if to bless it. "You are losing the town," he said kindly. "Let me help you keep it, by appointing a freight brute to look over my shoulder, by making people feel seen." Tolliver's eyes were as soft as peeled grapes and twice as slippery. "If Mercer confesses by night, you wake to a quieter street. If he doesn't, well, some men dig their own justice. We need only stand far enough away to avoid the dust." His smile warmed. "Sleep, Sheriff. Trust the law." Kane stared at the hand Tolliver laid lightly on his sleeve. The glove was immaculate. He thought of the shovel leaned against the cemetery gate last night, handle wrapped in oily rag, a neat little note tucked under the cord. "Midnight. Bring no one." He thought of a left boot dragging the toe, faint, like a habit learned in private. "You sleep," Kane said. "I'll keep watch." He walked away before Tolliver could shape any more kindness. On the boardwalk, a boy with a burlap sack of nails stopped him with the kind of courage children don't know is courage, until men teach them otherwise. "Sheriff," the boy said, "my pa says you ain't to come by the shop no more." His freckles looked like mostly healed burns. "Says bad luck climbs your shadow." Kane dropped to one knee so the boy didn't have to aim his fear uphill. "What's your name?" "Eben." "You tell your pa I already got about all the bad luck a man can carry. It ain't catching." He stood and tipped his hat, felt his cheek throb under the spot where Mrs. Holcomb's hand had found bone. "And you tell him I'll pay for the nails I took last week." "I ain't supposed to talk to you," Iban whispered, then threw the weight of his body into pretending he hadn't, and ran. By late afternoon, Pike's committee had men stapling broadsides along the street. "Order is the first mercy." A straw effigy, broad hat, a bit of tin foil winking at the chest, hung for an hour from a livery beam before Kane cut it down with one slice, rope thumping like a throat when it hits and stops. A storm line stood above the buttes like a jury with their minds made, and lightning took notes in the margins of the sky. As the first drops came, a few, fat and warm, a scream tore loose from the north end of town. A woman's scream, not the theater kind, the rip-your-throat kind men don't ever forget. Kane moved. The street narrowed with bodies straining all one direction. He shouldered through the knot at the cemetery gate, hand on the colt, rain denting the dust around his boots. A grave digger stood white as flour, shovel dropped, eyes wide as a horse's at snake sound. "Listen," the man said, pointing with a shaking finger. The wind went out of itself for a breath. The world held still. Somewhere above, rope creaked slow on rotten wood. From the cemetery's dark, Beyond the iron fence, beyond the cedar line, came a noise you could call imagination until it happened again. Knock, knock, knock. Then a child's voice, tiny, torn, certain, rose from the back of the crowd. Ma, ma, the ground's breathing. Kane looked up toward the ridge. The gallows rope, swung through the air, lay dead still. Rain fattened. The willow switch Tolliver had planted on the fresh mound trembled, though nothing touched it. Mason Pike lifted his hat with 2 fingers and smiled with his scar. "Looks like your prisoner's restless, Sheriff." Kane pushed the gate open and stepped into the cemetery alone. Badge cold as river stone. The town's heat at his back, turning to something colder than hate. He had told them there would be no mob on his street, but he hadn't told the dead what they could and couldn't do. The undertaker's knock came like a pistol tap on wood, quick and guilty. Kane rose from his chair before it sounded twice. Lampglass rattled on his desk. As a gust pushed through the open transom, the town smelled of rain that hadn't fallen and graves that had. When he opened the door, Fitch stood there, hunched in his black coat, hat dripping sweat instead of dew, lantern trembling in an old man's hand. "Boot Hill," Fitch whispered. "Sheriff, you best come." They walked without speaking. The midnight street was a throat full of dust. Boards creaked under their boots. A dog barked, then thought better of it. Kane's silver badge winked once at the lamp flame, and the light died on its surface as if swallowed. He turned the star in his fingers while they climbed the ridge, and felt, not for the first time, the hairline ridge running through one point. A flaw the eye missed, but the thumb remembered. Boot Hill lay silvered under a young moon. Sage made soft shivers against boot heels. Fitch set the lantern near a fresh mound and backed away like he'd set it beside a rattler. Kane saw at a glance what had dragged the undertaker from bed. The grave he'd ordered by law, no, by heat and fury, was wrong. Windscour wouldn't do that. Someone had come back to dig or climb. The shovel cut was neat on one side. On the other, finger gouges raked the clay in raw crescents. The coffin lid lay split and warped from within. A nail bent outward, like a finger pointing at the moon. Blood freckled the inner boards in a pattern that could have been rain if God bled on pine. Kane crouched, resting his palm on the splintered lid. The wood still held the day's sun. There was a trace of warmth, as if a body had just quit it. A rustle made his hand go to the pearl grip at his hip, but it was only a night bird shifting on the gallows frame farther down the slope. "Sweet mercy," Fitch breathed. "I swore him down tight. Sheriff, I swore." "Don't swear to me," Kane said, soft and even. "Tell me what you saw." Fitch swallowed. His lantern spit. Half-hour back. The bell started. The dead man's bell on the string. I rig 'em for the kin what still fear waking in boxes. Nobody paid coin this time. But he flinched at the coffin lid. "I rig 'em all the same." It rang, Sheriff. Rope tugged soft, then hard. By the time I run, it had gone quiet. I dug, found this. He gestured helplessly. Kane eased his weight into the clay and studied the tale the dirt told. 2 sets of prints along the lip, one booted, square heel worn down on the outside, the other barefoot, toes spread, a little drag in the left. Someone had climbed out half dead, then another had helped or hunted. There were the marks of a lantern pole pressed into earth, and more. A scrap of linen caught on a thorn, coffin shirt, torn in flight. Kane pocketed it. His steel-gray eyes slid to the hill's dark shoulder, where the abandoned courthouse squatted, windows like sockets. A breath of wind carried the smell of tallow and old paper. Behind them, other footsteps approached. Not careful ones. Voices hitching with drink and outrage. "You see it?" Harlan Pike called. Rancher. Rope coiled on his shoulder like a pet snake. Grave cracked open like the devil's egg. That what your justice looks like, Kane. Burying a man alive and losing him before he's cold. Men flanked him. Storekeepers, miners, a brakeman with black under his nails. Their faces were pale coin in the lantern light, stamped with the image of whatever story they needed to believe. One woman stood too, shawl tight around her bones, Red Mary from the Dove House, eyes red but not from drink. "Back up," Kane said without raising his voice. He didn't put a hand on his Colt. He didn't have to. The wind itself seemed to listen. Pike laughed. "Back up? That your line now? You bury a feller and we're to back up when he walks away. I say we put another man under that dirt. You." Fitch made a sound in his throat. "Kane, let the sound die. We're going to follow tracks," he said. "We're going to find who opened this grave and why." He let the badge catch a sliver of lamp flame. "We'll do it by law." "Law?" Pike spat dust. "You mean your law? This town's done with your kind of reckoning." Kane stood slowly, the lantern shadow cutting the scar along his neck. "Law ain't always justice," he said, and the words were a promise to himself more than a warning to them. "But justice rides with me." He dropped into the grave again to fetch the bell string. It lay slack, twine cut near the coffin handle, end ragged. The other end, he lifted it and felt it answer him like a fish on a line. Someone had tied the free end to a stake farther upslope, not to be heard by kin, but to be heard by a watcher. When he climbed out, Red Mary stood apart, watching the courthouse windows, her shawl licking in the wind. "He begged," she said. Her voice surprised him. It held no scorn. Whoever he was. He begged soft. "I was coming up from the back door after closing. Don't look that way at me, Sheriff." And I heard the bell. Not the big one. This one. Ain't no ghost. Someone wanted him alive. "Who?" Kane asked. Mary looked down. "Same someone who's been buying secrets with railroad gold. Judge Alden's boys been asking names in my house. Men who know where bodies and papers are buried. Sometimes the two are the same." The name hit the earth like a bullet. The men shifted. Some spat. Some stared at their boots. Pike's rope slipped a loop. A bell tongued once, soft, from the black courthouse. Kane's head came up. The courthouse bell had had its rope cut 3 years ago, when a drunk threw himself off the balcony with it around his neck. Since then, no one climbed those rotted stairs. Tonight, the sound gentled down, out of stone, like a throat clearing. Kane started walking. Pike started to follow. Kane turned his head a fraction, and the man stopped without pride. The undertaker's lantern swung wild as he hurried to keep the sheriff's shoulder in its circle. The courthouse doors sulked open at the shove of Kane's palm. Inside, smelled like dust and the ash of 100 arguments. Moonlight made a checkerboard out of the floor, where rain had freckled through a roof gone to lace. On the judge's raised dais, the old brass bell hung crooked in its frame. The rope stump dangled like a dead nerve, yet something in the dark had kissed it into speech. Kane's boot scuffed paper. He knelt, lamp low. A ledger leaf lay where the jury benches used to be, stamped in muddy heel. The numbers bled across the page. Freight, timbers, right-of-way considerations, names. Alden's clerk's hand, neat as a schoolmarm's whip. a smear of fresh clay dragged across it like a thumbprint. Fitch hissed, "Look there." On the judge's bench, sunk halfway into the wood, a nail pinioned a strip of gray fabric, the same coarse cotton as the coffin shirt, with 3 words scrawled in charcoal. "Ask Mary's boy." Red Mary, at his shoulder now, made a sound that was not a sob and not a laugh. "I told you," she said in a voice more tired than her face. "They've been asking after my boy. Folks think doves can't have children they love. He left when he was 14, joined the section gang, knows every mile of new track. Folks tell things to a kid who carries water and keeps his eyes down. If a man strangled truth into a grave, my boy might have heard where they threw the shovel." "Where is he?" Kane asked, out past the dry wash at the section camp. "But Sheriff—" She lifted the strip of fabric, then thought better and let it be. "Judge Alden will get there first if any of these fools gossip. And he's got papers saying he's the law." Wind nosed the bell again. It clanged once, then silence, as if breath had sat on the tongue of brass. Kane's badge was suddenly heavy. When he glanced down, the lamplight found the faint hairline again, bright as a spider thread through one point. He rubbed his thumb along it until heat burned his skin, and the line felt like nothing. The lie you can smooth with touch is still a lie. Boots scraped in the shadows, not townsmen, spurs with silver jangles, light as money. Judge Alden stepped from the dark aisle in a dustless frock coat and a smile that made no promise he couldn't break. "Sheriff," Alden said, hat still on his head inside the People's House. "A sad business. I've got men riding as we speak to pacify the section camp. Best let the courts handle it. You've done enough." "Enough?" Kane's voice came out quiet. The lantern hissed like a snake, catching a breath. "We got a grave open, a man on foot or hunted, and your clerk's figures bleeding through the floorboards." Alden's gaze slid past Kane, to the men crowding the doorway. He pitched his voice not to Kane, but to them. "You all saw how he buried that outlaw alive, rather than give him to a proper judge. You all smell the stink his justice makes, and now he prowls my courtroom at midnight, sniffing ledger pages like a coyote. There is a process, gentlemen. Without it, we are savages." Mary's hand twitched. Kane felt the town teeter again. He set the lantern on the bench and set his badge beside it. The star lay like a coin on an open palm. "You want process," Kane said. "We'll walk it." He nodded toward the ledger page, starting there, and with Mary's boy. "He talks to me, not your men." "I can make that boy vanish in a line of type," Alden replied, the smile gone, "like I made your prisoner vanish into dirt." Silence took the room in both hands. Even the gallows bird outside quit whispering. Kane stepped forward once. The judge's men, 2 deputies he didn't recognize, coats too new and guns too clean, moved to block him. Kane didn't break stride. The first man felt his wrist taken, turned, and found the room spinning. The second found a pearl-handled Colt under his jawbone, gentle as a preacher's Bible. "Son," Kane said low, "set that on the floor." The deputy did. Alden never flinched. He recalculated. "You draw against the court. It's treason," he said. Kane holstered. "No, it's a reminder." "To what?" "That the star on a man's chest ain't a toy." The big bell above them sounded again, not bright, dull, like a knock from inside a boarded room. Every head went up. Every throat closed. The sound came a third time, and a fourth, 4 knocks, funeral pace, then stopped. Kane's mouth went dry. Fitch's lantern guttered and found its flame again. From the hallway beyond the chamber, something dragged across wood. A soft scrape-scrape, then a wet cough like mud pulled free of a boot. The courthouse was supposed to be empty for years. Tonight it was breathing. Kane snatched the lantern and moved into the dark. The hallway smelled colder. On the wall, in the chalk that school children use on slates, a hand had written 6 words between blotches of clay. "You buried the judge's man alive." The last letter trailed off, as if the writer had been pulled away mid-stroke. At the end of the smear lay a thing that shouldn't have been there at all. A tiny brass bell from a coffin string, its twine frayed, still trembling. The tremble wasn't from his hand. It was tolling by itself, soft as breath. "Sheriff," Red Mary whispered behind him, voice shaking at last. "Do you hear it?" He did, and he heard something else at the same time. Boot soles coming up the courthouse steps from the night outside, quick and many, and a boy's voice carried with them, thin with fear and stubborn as a fence post. "I will tell him. I'll tell him everything." Kane turned toward the doorway as shadows stacked on shadows. The bell on his palm shivered once more, then went still, and his badge on the bench gave a single, brittle tick, like metal cooling too fast. And the boy stepped into the light with a hand over his mouth, like someone had tried to silence him, while Judge Alden, smiling again, lifted a folded paper and said, "Before he speaks, Sheriff, you might want to read your own warrant." Dawn came copper-red, the kind of light that made the world look skinned. The bell at St. Bartholomew's tolled once, then stuttered as if it had swallowed its own tongue. Folks turned toward the sound and froze, because a man was walking slow up Main, barefoot, coat torn, clay packed under his nails so thick it looked like he'd grown stone for hands. His hair was webbed with root fibers. Dust flaked from him with every step. Eli Mercer. The name rippled down the street like a thrown stone, skipping water. Kane stepped from the jailhouse with his silver badge catching the raw light. He had not slept. The badge had kept turning between his fingers all night, a small moon in a storm of thought. Now he pinned it to his duster, as a man belts on weather. The crowd opened as he moved, boots scuffing, whispers following, and Eli stopped in the middle of Main as if the earth hauled a rein on him. "Mercer," Kane said, voice low, even. A hawk's shadow crossed them, skimming the dust. "You should be dead." Eli's lips split in something that wasn't a smile. "I was," he rasped. His voice came like shale breaking. "Till midnight. Some graves don't keep what they're fed." The wind lifted, hot and mean. Close up, the details were knives. Rope burns ringed his wrists. The blue crescent of suffocation lay under his eyes. Dried blood starred his shirt where the coffin nails had kissed him back. The crowd's mutter turned to a hiss. "You buried me, Sheriff," Eli said, each word a stone. Face full of dirt, law stamped on the shovel. There was a tremor in the choke-chain silence. Kane felt it like a colt's first pull, fear coupled with wanting a fight. He didn't look at them. He watched Eli's pupils and the tremble of his jaw. "You were convicted," Kane said, sentenced in front of 30 men. Rope snapped in the rain. "I put you in the ground because a judge said it was law, and your kin would try to cut you loose before daybreak." Eli blinked slow, mud crust cracking at the corners of his eyes. A judge said a lot of things with a railroad man whispering in his ear. He swayed, then caught himself on the hitching rail. Splinters bit his palm, his breath hitched like a lame wheel. You ever been under earth, Kane? Hear your own breath turn to a last woman in your ear. Hear them worms give you a sermon? Kane stepped closer. The reek of wet loam clung to Eli like a second skin. He said nothing. Behind him, Deputy Jonah Pike shifted his weight. Kane could hear the rasp of leather as Pike's hand brushed the butt of his Colt out of habit. Eli lifted one staunch hand, showed the town the nails, torn raw, moons of blood. Coffin was nailed from the outside, he said. Then somebody pulled one nail back, just one, midnight on the dot, slid air through a straw like a snake, kept me breathing just enough. You know, a lawman taught me that trick when I was a kid, how a man could live longer than he had any right if the dirt was wet and the night was cold. Who? Kane asked. Eli's eyes slid past him, to Pike, then to the gallows on the hill, a black shape against a reddening sky, a scarecrow for souls. The sight put a splinter of memory in Kane's palm, rope slackening, rain like strings cut from heaven, the town's shout. He'd shouted last, the word justice tasting like iron. Name's comin', Eli said. He shuddered, then straightened with the prickly pride of a man who'd made it 1 hour past hell. But first, you're gonna see where I clawed my way up. He led them like a revenant heading home. The town followed, whisper-warm and hungry, boots whispering through weeds as they climbed Boot Hill. The grave stood raw, where lightning had shattered the stump last night and split the clay, an open mouth, caved side, showing the coffin's torn ribs. Scratch marks scored the inside lid, a frantic music etched in pine. Kane felt them under his fingers, shallow at first, then deep and ragged where panic taught strength. Saints preserve us, the undertaker muttered, hat crushed in his hands. He was reaching the whole time. A glint caught Kane's eye in the loam. He plucked it free, an iron nail bent sideways, and a straw no longer than a finger, reed cord, air. Somebody had fed him air. Kane raised his head. Across the graveyard's fence, the abandoned courthouse sagged in its weeds, the old place where sentences had been pronounced back when the railroad was still a rumor, and men argued over maps more than over bodies. Its shutters rattled in a wind Kane could not feel. Eli swayed. Man that pulled that nail, he said, voice low. Did it with a glove on, smelled of lamp oil and coal smoke, spoke soft through the dirt, told me, breathe when I say breathe. Then he said a prayer that wasn't a prayer. It was a timetable. He spat mud and something dark, then looked Kane in the face. Tell me, Sheriff, what kind of law digs a hole, shoves a sinner in, then keeps him alive to watch the town's fear double? Before Kane could shape a word, the clatter of harness cut the morning. A fresh column rode up from the south road, blue coats and dust-coated hats, flag streamer limp in the heat. At their head glided a tall man in a linen coat, too clean for this county. A paper roll tucked under his arm like a preacher's scroll. A territorial seal winked red wax in the light. By order of the governor, the man called. His voice had polish and the edge of a whetstone. I am Marshal Luther Crow. Sheriff Kane, you will relinquish your badge and sidearm into my custody. You stand under arrest for attempted murder and unlawful burial. A wave went through the crowd as if he'd pitched a net. Kane didn't move. The badge felt heavy on his breast, as if the metal had sucked up all the night's doubt and made it hard to breathe. Pike stepped between Kane and the horses without meaning to, just enough to show instinct. Marshal, Kane said, tone flat. You walk mighty quick for a letter. This town only just saw a dead man walk." Crow dismounted without creasing his coat. He smelled faintly of tobacco and ink, the city's perfume. "We walk quickest when men like you forget the difference between court and grave," he replied, soft as a snake in dust. He held up the paper. "Signed and sealed in Dry Hollow yesterday. Judge Nathaniel Albright presiding." Albright. The name struck like a struck match in dry brush. Railroad judge. Kane had seen him once, eyes bright with the kind of light you get from counting money you never touch. Eli's mouth twisted, as if the name soured his teeth. The judge who rushed Mercer's sentence through while the storm still chewed the sky. Someone murmured, "The one who built the gallows on a Sunday." "Badges," Crow repeated, hand out, palm pale. Kane looked down at his Colt, the pearl grip dulled with dust and years, then at his own hand. It didn't tremble. He eased the gun free, thumbed the cylinder to rest, and set it in Crow's waiting palm. Then he unpinned the star and laid it on top, a drop of moonlight on dark leather. Jonah Pike half-turned, shock and heat in his face. "Sheriff, law ain't always justice," Kane said. The words came slow, old as his scar. "But justice rides with me." And he raised his hands. The town let out a breath that tasted like defeat and relief at once. Crow's men moved, smooth as gears. Irons clicked, chains rasped, the old song of power. Cold cuffs bit Kane's wrists. Iron remembered every wrist it had ever held. "Walk," Crow said. They took him past the abandoned courthouse, its doors yawning like a toothless mouth. Eli watched, chest heaving. "You can't let them do this," a woman cried. "He's the only thing between us and the wolves." The cry didn't change the march. Boots thudded. A child sobbed. Somewhere, a shutter banged 3 times and went still. Inside the jailhouse, the light was knife-thin, the dust motes rising and falling like tiny nooses. Crow nodded at Pike. "Keys." Pike did not move. Sweat beaded his temples. His jaw worked like a man chewing cactus. Kane met his eyes, and for a thin moment, the room held only 2 men and a decision. "Give him the key, Jonah," Kane said. "We'll do this the law's way." Pike swallowed. His hand went to his pocket, then froze. He looked at Eli, at the town clumped in the doorway, at the gallows cutting the sky to ribbons. "What if the law's been bought?" he whispered. "What if justice is out back, waitin' in the weeds?" Before Kane could answer, Eli staggered forward, slammed both hands on the iron desk, and bellowed a name that cracked the air like a whip. "Voss." Silence knifed the room. Crow's eyes flicked. The crowd leaned. "Caleb Voss," Eli said, voice hoarse, triumphant and ruined. "Railroad paymaster. He paid for my rope and for your paper, Marshal. He was the hand at midnight fed me that straw, just to see what the town would do when I walked sunlit out of my grave. You want your murderer? He ain't wearing a star. He's wearing a watch chain." A gunshot split the morning. Glass exploded from the jailhouse window, stinging like hail. People screamed and scattered. Pike dove. Kane twisted against the cuffs. Crow flinched, hand going for his pistol on reflex. Eli Mercer jerked, as if a hook had yanked his spine, and pitched forward onto the floorboards, blood ribboning out beneath his cheek, bright and obscene. The shot's echo died. Through the broken pane, a figure stepped into view on the boardwalk across the street, smoke thinning from a long rifle's barrel. He wore a neat gray coat and a gold chain that glinted just once in the sunrise. Caleb Voss tipped his hat to the screaming town. and smiled. The shot blew the jailhouse window into bright hail. Eli pitched forward, cheek to the floor, blood running fast, bright as varnish on old boards. Screams bucked down Maine like spooked horses. A single thread of smoke climbed from the long rifle across the street, where a neat gray coat and a gold chain shone like money come to watch. Caleb Voss tipped his hat, smile small as a knife. Kane's wrists yanked hard against iron. Marshal Crowe had him by the elbow. Jonah Pike had half lunged and then froze between duty and gut. The tiny coffin bell in Kane's pocket trembled on its own the way it had in the abandoned courthouse. No rope, no hand, just a private tolling that made the back of the neck feel colder than shade. "Down!" Crowe barked, shoving Kane toward the wall as glass settled in a deadly glitter. "Deputies, cover the street. You, get a doctor." The crowd scattered into doorways and behind barrels as if the earth had opened a slit, and they were all trying to fall through at once. Voss didn't hurry. He slung the rifle with bookkeeper's care, stepped back beneath the awning, and let two men in dustless coats slide forward from the shadows to stand with him. Their tin stars weren't county, Pinkerton plates, polished to sermon shine. Kane dropped to his knees beside Eli. The outlaw's breath came quick, stopping halfway like a liar in a church doorway. "Hold," Kane said, palm to the wound, voice low and level, as if calm could slow blood. "You hold, here." Eli's eyes found him, bright through the film. Mud still clung to his lashes. He tried to smile and couldn't. "Dead once already," he rasped. "Second time's talkin' cheap." Crowe had his pistol out, sights flat on Voss. The marshal's jaw worked like a man grinding grit. "Caleb Voss," he called. "Drop the rifle and put up your hands. You're under arrest for murder." Voss didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. "Marshal Crowe," he said, as if greeting a neighbor. "I just prevented a jailbreak. The outlaw lunged for your prisoner. This town knows it. I acted to defend the court." He let his gaze slide to the crowd, collecting weak men the way a tide takes loose twigs. "Signed orders from Judge Albright authorize my men to support you. If you've a taste for ink, I'll show you." He lifted a paper. Red wax winked like a clot. "Don't you dare!" Red Mary shouted from the doorway, knuckles white on the jamb. "Don't you dare baptize blood with paper." The gallows rope up on the ridge creaked once, though the wind had gone still as breath before a slap. The coffin bell in Kane's pocket chimed again, smaller than a whisper. Kane pressed harder on Eli's chest. "Who else?" he asked, quiet enough the room had to lean to hear. "You said a name? Voss bought rope and paper. Who holds the knot?" Eli swallowed a breath that cut him. "Tolliver's the front porch," he gasped. "Alden's the house. Voss is the man upstairs counting money. There's one more." His hand found Kane's sleeve with the strength of a drowning man. "The courthouse. Midnight. They'll write you dead on a page before the trap drops. Mary's boy, he heard it all. They'll hang him to bleach the ledger clean." He drew a raw breath. His mouth worked around a word like it hurt. "Choose." Crowe glanced down, saw the outlaw's blood on the sheriff's hands, saw Voss on his feet with hired law shining beside him, and felt the equal pull of two ropes, process and truth. The marshal lifted his chin and shouted for irons and a litter at once, half a heartbeat both ways. "Keys," he snapped at Pike. "Move." Pike's face had gone gray as fence ash. He fumbled, then stilled, eyes on Kane. "Sheriff," he whispered, not meaning to say it out loud, Tell me which way." Kane's cheek bore Mrs. Holcomb's print from the morning. His chest bore cold metal where the badge had lain before he put it in the marshal's hand. He looked at Crow, at Voss, at the town's thin soul clinging to eaves and shadows. Then he looked down at Eli Mercer, who had walked out of a grave men called lawful, and saw a truth that was harder than iron. The curse here wasn't the dead. It was bought law. He turned his head, spat the taste of dust and guilt, and said it the way a man says his own name. "Justice rides with me." Pike moved. The key kissed iron with a small, decisive click. Crow's head snapped around. His eyes were flint and hurt. "You break custody now, Sheriff." "I keep custody of what's left of us," Kane said, voice low. "You seen a murder just like I did. Do right, Marshal, even if the paper says wrong." Eli tightened his fingers. "Under the dais," he whispered, the words sand and smoke. "Ledger. Names. Bring it to the rope. Make them read it with the wind in their throats." His mouth twitched, some final joke too tired to be born. "Bury me right this time, Lawman." The breath left him like a lamp going down. The little bell in Kane's pocket stilled. Outside, Voss let the rifle's muzzle dip a fraction toward the boardwalk, as if it were a gentleman lowering a hat for a lady. He smiled with all the warmth of a ledger closed on loss. "Your move, Marshal." Crow's gun never wavered. His voice did. "Caleb, step forward." Voss's Pinkertons spread a touch wider, hands easy near holsters. Not a flinch in them. They were paid to believe paper before people. Crow read that fact as if it were written on their teeth. For a moment he was only a man with a badge and an oath, and the mean little knowledge that an oath breaks a man before a man breaks it. Kane rose, the irons hanging open at his wrists like mouths. He looked at Crow, one heartbeat made of 10 years, and held out his hand, palm steady. "Give me my gun." The room forgot to breathe. Crow's eyes flicked to the broken window, to Voss, to the town of Dustwater, with its shoulders hunched and its children watching without blinking. Something in the marshal's face unlocked. He holstered his pistol, set Kane's Colt on the desk, and slid it forward with a knuckle. "On my authority," he said, voice flat with decision he would wear the rest of his life. "You're deputized until midnight. After that, I take you in." Kane nodded once. No thanks, no bargain. He picked up the Colt, thumbed the cylinder, felt the weight check him like a friend's hand. Then he reached for the star. It lay on Crow's papers like a coin on an open casket. Blood had spattered the edge. Eli's blood. Kane wiped it with his thumb and left a thin red crescent that would not come clean. He pinned the badge where it bit his ribs. "Law ain't always justice," he said softly. "For the room, for the rope outside, for the woman whose hand had marked his cheek. But justice rides with me." He stepped into the street and walked toward Voss. The town pulled back without thinking, parting the dust like a curtain. The sky had a bruise at the rim. Heat pressed down like a hand. Voss waited under the awning, gold watch chain quiet, boots dustless as if he walked above the world. "Mr. Voss," Kane said, stopping 10 paces out, voice carrying as even as church. "You and I have a reckoning, not with paper, with choice. You shot a man in my custody, and you nearly killed my town's nerve. You'll stand before the people you bought and hear what you are." Voss's smile thinned. "You propose a spectacle. I propose a hearing." Kane tipped his hat toward the ridge. toward the rotting gallows and the courthouse with its chalk marks and cold bell. Midnight. In the people's house. Bring your orders. Bring your men. Bring Judge Tolliver, Judge Alden, and every ledger you think will save you. Bring a rope, if you like. He stepped closer, and the pearl-handled Colt glinted like a small moon at his thigh. And bring your courage. You're short of it. A murmur ran the boardwalk. Fear and hunger and a kind of tired hope tangled up in it. Voss glanced past Kane to Crow, measuring the marshal's face, and found no comfort there. For the first time, something old and mean surfaced in his neat eyes. "Fine," Voss said. "Midnight." He leaned a fraction, voice soft. "You won't leave that room with a pulse." "Maybe," Kane said. "But if I don't, it won't be because paper said so." The sky growled. On the ridge, the gallows rope swung once, slow as a clock pendulum, though no wind moved. Red Mary stepped into the open, face pale and hard. "If you touch my boy," she told Voss, "the world will learn a new word for hell." Voss's smile returned, smaller. "He's already on his way, madam." Kane turned to Crow. "I'm going to the courthouse," he said. "Under the dais, I'll find your proof. Marshal, you hold this street till sundown. You keep Pinkertons from turning my people into defendants. Pike, get Mary safe. Then bring every soul who'll stand for truth to that courtroom. No torches, no ropes, just eyes." Crow gave a single nod. It had the weight of a verdict. "Go." Kane walked, Colt easy, badge heavy, the tiny bell in his pocket, cold as a coin pulled off a dead man's eyes. Main Street watched him go like a congregation when a preacher drops the good book and steps down. Thunder quilted the buttes. Dustwater's lamps blinked awake before the sun had the decency to fall. As Kane reached the foot of the courthouse steps, a sound came from inside, the dull knock they had heard before, patient, like someone asking admittance from a locked room in a burning house. He pushed the doors. The stale breath of old trials washed out, hot as a mouth. In the gloom, the dais hunched like a black altar. The bell on its frame twitched once without a rope, as if a fingertip tapped it from the other side of time. "Kane!" Jonah Pike's shout broke from the street behind. They got the boy, Mary's boy, up on the gallows, now. Kane looked up through the doorway to the ridge. Lightning stitched a white seam across the sky, and for an instant it wrote the world with cruel clarity. The old scaffold, the rope thrown over, a small figure standing where a man should stand, hands trussed, a sack half drawn over his head, while a shape at the lever looked down at town and waited. The thunderblow swallowed the scream that started. The rope swayed without wind, and the trap door creaked. Wind moaned through the busted shutters of the old courthouse, a long, hungry sound that turned the empty room into a throat. Moonlight washed the benches pale as bones. The gallows behind the building, weather-black and crooked, threw a jagged silhouette against a sky-bruised purple. Sheriff Kane stepped through the doorway first, boots whispering over drifted dust and mouse droppings, his silver badge a cold coin on his chest. Eli Mercer followed in irons, cuffs scraping his raw wrists, the stink of grave dirt still in his clothes. Deputy Lark brought up the rear, lantern high, its flame shivering in the draft. The place smelled of old paper, rain rot, and something sour that rose up from the cracked floorboards. On the judge's bench sat a single ledger, bloated from damp, and beside it a brass key ring whose teeth winked like little knives. Kane's eyes, gray and rimed with weariness, moved from the bench to the shadows higher up. Gallery rail, broken window, the rope of the courthouse bell vanishing into gloom. He could feel the town gathered outside like a tide, murmurs, boots scuffing, a cough that wouldn't quit. They wanted an ending. "You sure about this?" Deputy Lark asked, voice low. The lantern cast hot light on her cheek, showed a pulse jumping at her throat. "No," Kane said, plain as a headstone. "Do it anyway." Mercer swallowed hard. He looked older than yesterday, older than his years, with soil under his nails and a line pressed into his cheek, like wood grain from a coffin plank. "You buried me by your own hand, Sheriff," he rasped. "If we're making speeches, I want mine heard while I'm still breathing." Kane's jaw worked. He set the badge spinning between thumb and forefinger. It made a coin's soft clink against the desk. Rain began to spit through the high window. "You'll speak," he said. "You'll be heard." The outer doors boomed. 4 men swept in like weather, hats slick with drizzle, gun belts creaking. At their center moved Territorial Judge Alistair Pike, the law in a dark frock coat, beard trimmed neat, breath sweet with clove. He gave the gallows outside a quick look and smiled like a man who'd found a chair in a crowded room. "Sheriff Kane," Pike said, boots tapping the floor in an unhurried rhythm. "The people want closure. You sentenced this man to earth and spade. He crawled back. Best remedy? Rope." Kane let the badge settle flat against his chest. The bell rope rubbed the ceiling beam with a quiet fur sound. Outside, thunder padded closer. "I sentenced him," Kane said, voice even. "But I did it on your warrant, Judge. A writ signed in haste. A widow swore she saw him light the fuse, and I swore my town wouldn't burn again. Now that widow is gone. The statement, misfiled, lost, or fed to pigs. Either way, it stinks." Pike's smile thinned. "You're rattled, Sheriff. Grave's opening will trouble any Christian man, but our code is strong precisely because we follow it when rattled." He lifted the brass ring and let it chime. "Unlock him. We'll finish this under the scaffold, as frontier law permits. The town will sleep." Mercer took a step, chains muttering. "Ask him," he said. "Ask why the coffin lid I beat on had 2 sets of nail holes. Ask about the extra boards. Ask why the shovel that freed me weren't my own hands." Kane's gaze cut to the ledger. The damp book had swelled around its cord and puckered like bad skin. He flipped it open with his left hand, while his right hovered near the colt. The pages breathed mold. Names marched in crooked lines, assets and fines, a column labeled Special Disposition. He found it. Eli Mercer, interment, by emergency writ. Under it, lighter ink, different hand. Substitute executed, fee collected. The room shrank. Dust motes hung in the lantern beam like a slow blizzard. "Substitute," Kane said softly. The word tasted of pennies. Judge Pike's eyes cooled. His hired guns tightened. Deputy Lark shifted her weight, the lantern flame guttering as a draft licked it. "You think you found a magic word," Pike said, "but you found a clerk's squiggle and a drunk's memory. Don't mistake weather for judgment." Kane closed the book, fingers trembling just once. He remembered the night he'd buried Mercer, the crowd tight as a noose around the grave, the shovel biting black earth at midnight because a fire had taken 2 houses and 6 souls, and the town needed someone under dirt to make the smoke stop in their minds. He remembered his own hands lifting a lid, his own voice saying the words. He remembered Pike's pen scratching like a beetle in a wall. "Who did you condemn, Judge?" Kane asked, voice lower now, gravel dragging. "Whose name did we bury in Eli Mercer's place?" From outside came a whip of lightning that blew white through the window. The thunder that walked in after it rattled the benches and shook dust from the rafters. In that lit heartbeat, Pike moved, fast for a man gone soft at the middle. His hand snapped to his coat. The nearest gunman's coat flared, steel showing like a fish's flash. Deputy Lark cried, "Judge!" and her lantern swung wide. Kane didn't draw. He stepped. The badge thumped his chest as he drove a shoulder into the judge and bounced him off the bench hard enough to pop the keys into the air. The gunman fired wild. Splinters leapt off oak. The lantern flew, smashed, fire licking instantly along a fallen sheaf of oiled writ paper. Smoke coughed up. The courthouse bell rope brushed his hat, and Kane seized it with his left hand, yanked once, hard. The bell above answered with a hoarse, hammered note that shuddered the air. "Drop 'em," Kane barked, voice riding the bell's quake. "Every last iron." One man flinched and obeyed. Another fired again, the shot gouging an old jury rail that hissed like a snake. Deputy Lark drilled that one through the thigh, his howl stapled to the thunder. Mercer, cuffed but not broken, stepped into a swing and lashed his chain like a flail. It caught a pistol hand and cracked bone. The weapon went skittering, clattering against the ledger. The smell of scorched paper bloomed. Judge Pike scrabbled for his pocket again. Kane's Colt came up then, a cut of blue in smoke. "Easy," he said. Pike froze, breath whistling. Rain fattened, ticking on the windows, hissing on the heat where the lantern's spill took hold. Men outside shifted, murmured, the town's tide lapping at the threshold. "Out on the scaffold," Kane ordered, shoving Pike with the barrel. "If we're going to hold court, we'll do it where God and everyone can hear." The storm ushered them into the yard, lanterns bobbing among faces pinched with fear and fury. The gallows steps felt slick under Kane's boots. The hemp loop swung, creaking like an old boat. Pike climbed under the gun, pale and blinking rain. Deputy Lark held the others in her sights, lips pressed white. Mercer stood below, chains glistening. The bell tolled again, Lark's doing, one, then another, solemn as Sunday. Kane raised his voice, thunder answering like a judge's gavel. "You all remember that night," he said, eyes cutting across the sea of hats. 2 houses burnt, 6 dead. Eli Mercer blamed. "I took a spade because the court said so, and put soil on a living man in the name of keeping you safe." His throat shook. He swallowed it. He crawled back, and I smelled rot in the writ. He slapped the ledger open on the rail with his free hand. Rain stippled the page. "Substitute executed. Fee collected. Judge Pike, you got words to say about what those words mean." Pike licked rain off his lips. "Emergency allowances exist. Plague, riot, flood, things that break the normal chain. A substitute is a legal instrument under Code 32. "Name." Kane's voice cracked the night. "Whose life paid for the neatness of your paperwork?" Silence. Then a voice from the crowd, old Mrs. Leary, thin and tremulous like creek ice. "Whose boy, Alistair?" Something in Pike's face faltered. He broke. "The vagrant," he snapped, rage replacing polish. "The nameless wretch they dragged from the livery fire last spring. Nobody claimed him. The town needed bomb. Ledger balanced, peace purchased, and I'd do it again. That's frontier law, Sheriff." It was as if a different wind blew through Kane. It went everywhere in him, through the rooms where his wife and son had once lived, the black gap inside where their killers roosted like crows. He felt the badge heavy against his heart. The rope whispered at his back. Law ain't always justice, but justice rides with me, Kane said, quiet. Some men on the edges flinched like a pistol had gone off anyway. He holstered the Colt. The town made a small, astonished noise. Pike's mouth opened in a snarl. In the same instant, Kane stepped behind the judge and drove the noose down, not over Pike's neck, but around the beam itself, whipping the slack around a post and heaving until wood screamed. The scaffold coughed. One of the supports kicked loose, the whole ugly edifice collapsing sideways with a wet crack. People scattered, shrieking. In the tangle, the damaged platform punched through the courthouse wall, exposing shelves of moldy files and a black-bricked arch low to the ground, a hidden crawl space. Cold air breathed out. With it, a smell like long-locked secrets. Deputy Lark swore softly. Kane yanked Pike toward that dark mouth and shoved him to his knees, iron on his wrists now. "You'll swing clean if the law says so," Kane said, chest heaving. "But tonight you answer living questions." Mercer stared at the arch, face gone sallow. "That's where the shovel came from," he whispered. "That's where the hands that freed me lived." Kane crouched, rain dripping off his hat brim, and held the lantern Lark thrust at him down into the crawl. Stone, mud, a narrow stack of planks, and tucked behind them, dry as bones, a wooden crate, stenciled with a freight mark he knew too well. Canaan boy, mercantile, 2 towns and 12 years ago. His breath stopped. He pried the lid with his knife. Inside, wrapped in old cloth, lay keepsakes taken from graves, rings, a woman's locket the exact shape of his wife's, and a small tin soldier with one arm bent back, the way his boy had bent it, laughing. The world tilted. Rain hushed. Somewhere a horse stamped and shook bridle bells like winter. Kane stood up slow. He turned the bent tin in his palm until it bit his skin. He looked at Judge Pike. The man's eyes skittered, seeking any plank to cling to that wasn't truth. "Who dug them up?" Kane asked, voice not much more than breath and thunder. "Who sold my dead back to the living?" Pike swallowed. "You don't want that name," he whispered. "It sits closer than you think." A single rifle cracked from the dark edge of the crowd. Deputy Lark lunged. Too late. A lantern burst. Sparks whirled up. When the smoke cleared, Eli Mercer was on his knees, palm pressed to a fresh line of red across his ribs, eyes wide, as if he'd seen something no living man should. Footprints, mud, fresh, peeled away from the far corner of the yard toward the mesquite. Not one set. 2. Kane looked down at the tin soldier in his hand, rain purling on its bent arm. The courthouse bell tolled again, all by itself. Who else had crawled out of a grave tonight? Dawn always came late, to men who had buried things they shouldn't. Kane rode out of that yard with rain in his coat and ash in his throat, the tin soldier tucked in his inner pocket where the badge used to rest. The star still pinned his chest, but it felt lighter now in a way that frightened him. He had torn down a gallows to save a man he once sentenced. He had put irons on a judge the territory trusted because the ledger smelled wrong. He had chosen a crooked path because the straight one led to a pit. The law had given him order when grief made him a blade. It had given him words to say over blood and steps to take when blood called for more. But the law had also given him writs and substitutes and men who could balance a town's ledgers with a stranger's breath. Justice, when it came, rode nearer the ground. It wore mud, not polish. It asked a man to keep living with what he'd done. He could feel his boy's tin sentinel warming against his ribs with the heat of his body. "Closer than you think," the judge had said. Behind him, the bell's last toll slid off into morning. Ahead, the prints split. One set heavy, one quick. Kane touched the brim of his black hat, and the wind tasted like rain and iron.